trying something new. Okay. Trying something new today. What I'm actually tired of having to try to do is create content that is tight and confined. I used to have a really hard time expressing anger. That's not true. That's not true. I used to have a hard time receiving anger. It's not so much that I had a hard time expressing it. I would express anger and it would be like so intense. I would get angry and the experience that I would have would rock me. It used to be an experience that really hijacked my nervous system. It kind of terrified me because it was such a powerful emotion. And that meant that when I was experiencing it from other people, it was also really scary. And when I started to learn nervous system regulation, when I started to learn about trauma, in particular, the fact that parts of us can be frozen in time, and those parts stay the age that they were when they first experienced the thing that was so overwhelming that the organism had to cut the engine and say, no more, we can't be with that. That's too much. We're going to put that over here to be processed at a later date. I started to understand and come into contact with and feel all of that energy that was being held, that unexpressed expression that was being held in my tissues. And it was a lot to be with. Rather than learning how to be with it, the thing that I first thought I needed to do when I started to regulate my nervous system was to maintain a chill, cool state all the time. And so people that would come into my kinesphere, who were threatening, who triggered me, I'd be like, nah, I don't need to make space for you or time for you. You're upsetting my peace. And my peace is very important. I'm healing, and my peace is very important. And I didn't realize that that wasn't building nervous system capacity. That was using being regulated as an excuse to hold very rigid expectations around the circumstances that I needed to be in place in order for me to feel okay and safe in the world. I was using my safety as an excuse to be intolerant of other people in their expressions. And that's a problem. That's sticky. It's not the best tactic when there's like legitimate injustices in the world that we need to get expressive about in order to get things done. It's not helpful when there are boundaries that need to be reinforced if they get crossed, right? Anger is a useful emotion when something like that happens. And if I am only tolerant of the people who are able to come into my kinesphere and stay calm, cool, and collected, I am cutting myself off from a huge range of expression that makes me a normal, living, breathing human being in the world. So there was this weird inverted way that nervous system regulation became a tool or a method. Liz Koch and Sarah Bearden talk about the insistence on homeostasis that became its own kind of controlling mechanism. This thing that was a good way to manage myself, to be well-behaved and domesticated. It was squeezing the wild out of me. And it was also creating fragility or reinforcing fragility around my wounds, around the places in me that were intolerant of other people being in their own fullest expression. What I was used to was internalizing people's expression and taking it personally. I disappointed someone. The first story that I would go to was, there's something wrong with me. I'm broken. There's something I'm not doing. I need to be better. Rather than just being able to acknowledge that people get emotional, and those emotions are designed, they're built to move through us. A real shift happened in my healing when I began to understand that nervous system regulation is a means to an end, and that end is building my nervous system capacity to be with more of life. This obsession with being well regulated, or this misunderstanding that somehow existing in homeostasis is better than being expressed, robs us of our creativity. It robs us of the opportunity to actually learn from our discomfort and learn from the unknown, because change happens at the edges of what we know and what we don't know. Growth happens when we're faced with things we don't recognize, and we learn how to be with those things. We learn how to integrate those experiences or those parts of ourselves. We don't change by staying the same and staying with what's familiar and what's comfortable. It's not useful to stay in stressful environments past due. We don't regulate so that we can continue overextending and overachieving either. Learning how to regulate helps us restore the default settings on our system so that we can properly discern between what is and isn't deserving of our precious energy. Because at the end of the day, the most valuable resource you have is your time and your attention. And where you pay attention is where you direct your energy. And when your system is constantly being hijacked by the things that are happening to you now that remind you of old threats, you're not in control of your life. But we don't regulate to stay feeling safe forever. We regulate to reclaim the wild parts of us, the parts that can't be tamed, the parts that are not up for domestication, the parts that are intelligent and plugged into the natural world from which we are born, that we are connected to, that we spring from, so that we can actually move through the world and experience more of life and be more agile in the face, more adaptive in real time, in a way that continues to help us feel free, not constricted, playing small, performing, trying to be good. That path is the path that leads us to embodying a shape where we are much more easy to control. So I'm going to opt for being that wild weed that busts through the concrete that no one saw coming. The imperfections, the imperfections are all a part of it. All a part of it. Literally just having a ball over here. Imperfect.